somehow they have to keep coming up against these contradictions and finding a way through that isn't an either or. And he's not providing the answers. He's just holding that space and forcing people in. And I was wondering, you know, what we know about emergence and emergent change and all that is that it is the most effective leadership and change process in highly complex situations where no one knows what the cause-effect relationships are. So you can't predict ahead of time what's going to fix what. So the best thing to do is to hold that space of complexity, get as many people in the conversation as possible, and allow new ideas to emerge and see what works. We know that. And there's incontrovertible evidence that that's the best way to go, and there's all sorts of successful examples. And yet, in business, in North America at least, it's so rarely used. And about a year and a half ago, I started to think, you know, I think the reason is because it's contradictory to our core leadership myth, right? And our core leadership narrative, right? And our core leadership narrative, at least in North America, is that leaders are visionaries. You know, and it's like you pick up any text on, in fact, complaining to me because he was retiring, and as they were going through a succession, they hired, you know, a headhunter to come in and help them find a new CEO, and the board started talking about what are the qualities we want from a CEO, and the first word out of their mouths was, we need a visionary. And Tom's going, how do I stop this in its tracks? That's the last thing we need, you know.
What are better things we need?
We need someone who can hold the space of complexity. And manage the anxiety of that, because here's the thing about an emergent change approach. It's much more anxiety provoking. It's much more anxiety provoking for a leader to say, I don't know what the answer is, but here's the question, than for a leader to say, here's the answer. Go this way. People want that.
So the leaders should somehow help to create an atmosphere of tolerance of anxiety that's going along with complexity?
Yeah. I think they have to be able to manage their own anxiety and not jump on the first, you know, possible solution that shows up, because I think that's one of the ways in which emergence fails, is you try to create an emergent process, a little emergence happens, and boom, you jump on something, it's too soon. You know, you need to allow a certain amount of fermentation and falling apartness, actually, before you jump on the right thing. But that's part of it. Part of it is, so they got to manage their own anxiety. Part of it's the managing the anxiety in the system. I think there would be less anxiety in the system if people had a narrative of emergent leadership. So they would look at a leader who is holding the space of complexity and they go, he's doing the right thing. That's the right job. But they don't have that right now. We don't have a narrative of emergent leadership. We have a narrative of visionary leadership. And if a leader is not a visionary, then they're not a leader, right? And the problem with visionary leadership, and we have this, you know, in the business press and the popular press, you know, and it's all this, we have these stories about great visionary leaders, Steve Jobs, you know, this sort of thing. And the problem is, for every Steve Jobs, there's 1,000 guys.
It's not the majority of our economy.
Well, you don't know if a vision's the right vision until way down the road. A lot of visions are the wrong vision, you know, and nobody, you know.
So, which survived?
You know, you don't know, you know. It's like, I mean, we have a lot of, you know, Lehman Brothers had a vision.
You know? How about I used to think that we need also people who have not visions, some visions, but design competence, have an image, how it could be, should be, and these are not always the same people who have the relationship quality to build up spaces, to accompany people, and you cannot expect usually from one person to be really good at both parts, but you can support a climate where you know you need both, and think about how it can be combined in the leading roles.
Yeah. It's difficult, right? Because if you have someone who really can see a viable future and the path to that future, people want to follow that. It's a very powerful stance to create followership. The problem is, in a world of increasing complexity and volatility and unpredictability, in some ways I think people who take that stance are a bigger problem than a solution, because the chances that they're going to have the right vision are decreasing rapidly because of the volatility. And that instead of having "I know the way, follow me" kind of leaders,
Yeah, maybe that's a question of the kind of visions. If there are cultural visions, you have visions. People should talk to each other. People should get some principles and frames that are usually lead to solid outcomes.
Right.
Also, nobody knows the answer in advance.
Right.
So this maybe has to do with the kind of visions.
Yeah,
I have cultural visions.
Yeah, you could call it a vision to say, here's the issue we need to, here's the issue we need to grapple with. So, great example would be, people hate this example because they don't like the company, but, and now I'm just blocking the name of the company, the one that, the company that makes the genetically modified seeds. Monsanto. See, so, 20 years ago, Monsanto was a failing conglomerate with a bunch of disconnected small businesses, none of them which were doing very good. And a new leader showed up, and he provided a generative image that galvanized that organization. His image was feeding a hungry planet. He didn't know how they were going to feed a hungry planet.
20 years ago,
He didn't know how all these different divisions of Monsanto and all the different competencies would come together to make that happen. But that was the challenge he put in front of them. How do we feed a hungry planet? Right. So this is the difference, right? I would say most times when people talk about a leader with vision, they mean this guy knows how we're going to feed a hungry planet, how we're going to reorganize, which divisions should be together, which markets we're going to enter, how we're going to,
This is not my understanding of
Yeah,
vision.
I think that's what most people assume a visionary leader.
Now I understand.
He knows how we're going to get there, and he can show us the way. And if you read most descriptions of what vision means, that's what it's described at.
For me, it's more important to have visions about the how than about what.
Yeah. Well, for him, it was like he held the way I would describe it is he held the space of complexity. How are we going to feed a hungry planet? You want to get in this game with me? Is this an appealing game to you?
Right.
Do you care about this? And for a lot of those engineers who had been toiling away and could care less doing crappy work, all of a sudden this was an amazingly generative
they
rallying
feel
call,
meaningful,
right?
to
Like,
people.
yeah, and people stepped into that and started to and what they ended up with, no one could have predicted that. And so I think in a volatile, complex, unpredictable world, that's the kind of leadership we need, is people who can hold that space of complexity and have the right question, but not have the right answer. But we don't have a story about that.